Summer in the 100-acre wood arrived the way all summers arrive, slowly and then completely, the trees filling in their canopies until the spaces between the leaves closed, and the light came through only where the light could find a way. And the finding made patterns on the ground that moved when the wind moved. The stream ran low. It had been dropping since May, the banks widening by increments, exposing stones and roots that had spent the spring under water and now sat drying in the long afternoons with the patient, blinking look of things that had not expected to be seen. The meadow had gone gold. The air smelled of warm grass and dry earth, and the faintly sweet, heated scent of oak bark, and the whole wood hummed with the busy industry of a world that has been given light and warmth and intends to use both before either is taken away. Kanga was awake before the light found her window. This was not unusual. Kanga was awake before most things, before the birds started their full chorus, before the dew finished forming on the grass outside, before Rue's breathing shifted from the deep, slow rhythm of sleep to the lighter, quicker rhythm that meant he was surfacing toward morning. She lay still in the dark and listened to him breathe. His breathing was even. His position had shifted in the night. He had turned from his side to his back, his arms flung wide in the unself-conscious sprawl of a body that trusts its bed completely. And the shift told her he was still under, still 2 or 3 minutes from waking, and the 2 or 3 minutes were hers. She rose. She moved through the house with the practiced quiet of someone who has mapped every creak in every floorboard and has plotted her morning route to avoid them. The quiet was part of the morning. The quiet was where Kanga prepared. She filled the kettle. She set it on the stove and turned the flame to the point just below the sound, the point where the water would heat without the kettle announcing it. She took down Rue's cup, which was the small one with the chip on the rim that he preferred because the chip gave his lip something to find, and her own cup, which was the plain one, the one with no features worth mentioning, and she set them on the table at the places where they always sat. She checked the window. The sky was paling in the east, but the sun was not yet up, and the garden was a wash of grey-blue shapes, the fence, the rosemary bush, the path that led toward the stream. The dew was heavy, which meant the day would be warm, which meant she would need to have breakfast ready before the light reached his window, because once the light reached his window, the morning would begin in earnest, and the beginning would not wait. The kettle found its sound. She lifted it before the whistle. Rue woke in the middle of a bounce. Not an actual bounce. He was in bed, and the bed was solid, and the blankets were warm, and the pillow was where pillows are. But whatever he had been dreaming had involved motion, because his legs were already moving when his eyes opened, a small cycling movement under the covers that slowed as the room arrived around him, and the dream retreated, and the morning was there.
Mama?
Kitchen,
said Kanga from the kitchen. The word was enough. Rue was out of bed and moving before the word had finished travelling through the house, feet on the floor, across the rug, through the doorway, into the hall. He arrived at the table. His cup was there. His breakfast was there. Kanga was there, sitting across from him with her own cup, which was still full because she had not yet drunk from it, because she did not drink until he had started, because starting meant he was settled, and settled meant the morning had a shape.
Can I go to the pool today?
after breakfast,
said Kanga.
After breakfast.
Rue agreed and ate with the focused speed of someone who has identified the obstacle between himself and the rest of the day and intends to remove it efficiently. The pool. He had been going to the pool for 2 weeks and talking about it when he came home, the talking always trailing the experience, as though the present tense of the pool required all of his attention and left nothing for words. Kanga had seen the pool. She had found it before Rue did. The pool sat in the low ground east of the stream, where the land dipped and the water from the spring runoff had nowhere to go. It had been a puddle in April, a pond in May, and by June the stream had dropped enough that the channel connecting it to the main flow had thinned to a seep, and the pool had become its own thing, a body of water the size of a large room, still and dark and edged with vegetation that was thickening in the summer heat, the plants leaning in over the surface as though they were listening to it. She had walked its perimeter. She had checked the depth, shallow, a foot at most. She had checked the banks, firm, gently sloped, no undercut. She had checked the approaches, the path from the stream, the gap in the scrub, the open ground on the south side. Safe. The pool was safe. Not interesting, not dangerous, not anything that required her particular skill, just safe.
I'm done.
Said Roo, and he was. The plate clean, the cup drained, the morning's obstacle dispatched. He was already sliding from his chair, already moving toward the door.
I'll walk with you,
Said Kanga. He nodded, a quick, forward-tilting nod that was already part of the motion toward the door, and Kanga rose and followed, and the following was smooth and immediate, and did not look like following at all. It looked like a morning. The path to the pool led along the stream and then away from it, through the section of scrub where the hawthorn grew dense, and the bramble reached across the gaps, and the ground was soft with the accumulated leaf-fall of years. Roo walked ahead. He walked with the forward-leaning energy of a body that has not yet learned to hold anything in reserve, his feet finding the path by memory now, the trips he had made to the pool in the past fortnight having worn a faint but perceptible line through the grass. Kanga walked behind. Roo ducked under a hawthorn branch. He ducked cleanly. He did not look back. Past the branch, the path bent left. It had always bent left, following the contour of the stream toward the low ground where the pool sat. But on the right, where the hawthorn thinned, a gap opened between the stems. Not a path, but the possibility of one, a space where the light came through at an angle, and the ground was covered with something pale, fallen blossom or seed down, and from somewhere beyond the gap came a sound. A tapping, rapid, irregular, the sound of a beak on dead wood, and the sound was close and bright, and Roo's head turned toward it. His step shifted. His weight moved right, toward the gap, toward the tapping, the body angling toward the sound entirely, without negotiation. Kanga's pace changed. Not a word. Not a sound she could have identified, or a movement she would have called a movement. Her stride shortened by a half step, the rhythm behind Roo altering by a fraction, and the fraction reached him not as instruction, but as weather, a change in the air, a shift in the pressure of the space between them. His weight settled back, his step returned to the path, the gap with its pale ground and its tapping passed on his right and closed behind them, and Roo walked on toward the pool, and did not mention the sound, and Kanga walked behind him and did not know she had made one. He cleared a second branch with room. His legs were longer than they had been in spring, longer and less certain of their own length, the joints finding new angles, the stride occasionally miscalculating the distance between intention and ground. The scrub opened. The pool was there. It lay in the low ground, like something the season had forgotten, dark water in a green surround, quiet, complete, undisturbed by the stream's current. The surface was still. A few insects moved across it, water boatmen, skating the tension with their wide-set legs, leaving trails that healed behind them immediately. The mud at the edges was soft and dark, and marked with the prints of what had visited, a bird, something with small, clawed feet, the long drag of a grass snake. Still shallow, still safe. Roo went to the edge. He went directly, without pause, with the certainty of someone returning to a place that has been waiting for him. He sat down on the flat stone that jutted from the bank, his stone, the one he had chosen on his first visit and returned to each time since, chosen because it was the right height and the right distance from the water, and his body knew this before his mind did. He sat and he looked at the pool. Kanga stood on the slight rise behind him, where the ground was firm and the sightline was clear, and she could see the pool and the bank and the water and Roo and the scrub beyond, and the path behind them, and the gaps in the hawthorn where something might come through, though nothing had come through, and nothing was likely to come through, because this was the 100-acre wood in July, and the most dangerous thing in it was the heat. Roo did not look back. He was looking at the pool. Something had moved near the far edge, a beetle maybe, or a lava rising to the surface, and Roo watched the ripples widen and reach the near bank, and watched the water return to stillness, and he waited for the next thing. The next thing was a long time coming. This was the pool's gift, its patience. Roo waited. A fly landed on the water, sat for a moment, and lifted off. A bubble rose from the mud and broke at the surface with a sound so small it was barely a sound at all. The plants at the far edge shifted as something moved through them, slowly, invisibly, parting the stems and letting them close. Roo watched all of it. In the scrub near the water's edge, on the far side, something moved in the low branches. Small, brown, quick. It flitted from one stem to another and then was gone into the thicker vegetation, and the branch it had left swayed once and was still. Kanga saw it. Her eyes tracked the movement, processed it. Small bird, probable wren, no threat, and released it. The morning continued. The sun climbed. The heat built until the air above the water shimmered faintly, and the mud at the edge dried in a thin crust, and the afternoon was there without having announced itself.
Can we come back tomorrow?
Said Roo without turning around.
Yes.
Said Kanga from the rise.
Good.
Said Roo. The wren, if it was a wren, sang once from the far scrub. A brief, complicated sound, rapid and dense, just singing. Just the sound a small bird makes on a summer afternoon beside a pool, because singing is what it does, and the doing is the whole of it. The pool was still. Roo was still. The afternoon was warm and long and going nowhere, and Kanga stood on the rise and watched. The days went on, and the pool went on, and Roo went to the pool. He went every morning after breakfast, with the same unhesitating certainty, the path to the scrub now worn to bare earth in places where his feet had been finding the same ground day after day. Kanga walked behind. The distance was the same. The route was the same. Her attention scanned the path ahead with the precision it always brought, finding nothing, adjusting nothing. The pool had deepened into itself. The plants at the margins had closed over the mud in places, making small rooms of green shade where the insects gathered. The water level had dropped, an inch, maybe less, and the drop had exposed a ring of darker mud at the edge, smooth and fine-grained, printed with the feet of everything that had come to drink or hunt or simply be near the water. Each morning the record was different. Each morning the pool had been visited by things that did not come when anyone was watching. Roo noticed this. He crouched at the mud's edge, his face close to the surface, reading the prints with the grave concentration of someone studying a language he was in the early stages of learning. He did not ask Kanga what had made them. He did not collect them or name them. He looked, and when he was finished, he looked at the water. Kanga stood on the rise. She had stood on the rise yesterday, and the day before that, and the standing was the same standing, and the ground beneath her feet was dry and firm, and the sight lines were clear, and the water was shallow and safe. She shifted her weight. Her left foot had gone numb on the firmest part of the rise, and the numbness had arrived without her noticing it, and she was noticing it now, and the noticing was a disturbance, a small break in the surface of the watching, like a bubble rising from the mud of the pool. She shifted. Feeling returned. She found herself looking at her feet, the imprints they had left in the dry grass, 2 shallow depressions that were there every day now, the grass pressed flat and beginning to yellow where the light could not reach it. She was marking the ground. The way Rue's path from the house had marked the ground. The way the animal prints marked the mud at the pool's edge, except that the prints in the mud were from animals who had come and gone, who had been here and then elsewhere, and Kanga's prints were from standing, just standing, in the same place, every day. She looked up. She resumed. The heat was heavier now. July had settled into its deepest register, the air thick and still, the shade under the scrub denser than it had been, the water's surface occasionally broken by a bubble rising from the mud below, gas from the decomposing leaves on the bottom, working its way up through the silt in slow, irregular intervals, each bubble a small, round disturbance that widened and flattened and disappeared. Rue watched the bubbles. He had no theory about the bubbles. He was not counting them or timing them or trying to predict where the next one would surface. In the scrub on the far side of the pool, low in the hawthorn, a bird was moving. Kanga's gaze had drifted to it, which was itself unusual because Kanga's gaze did not drift. But Rue was safe, the pool was still, the afternoon held no trajectories, and the gaze had loosened. The bird was small, brown, quick, moving through the low branches with short, precise hops, pausing at each new position to look, head tilted, the dark eye sharp. Its path through the scrub had no trajectory that Kanga could read, no departure point, no arrival, no arc of intention connecting one position to the next. It was simply moving. She watched the bird. 5 seconds, maybe 10, not long. Then Rue shifted on his stone, a sound, the scrape of his foot on rock, and Kanga's gaze was back, snapping to him with the speed of a thing released, and the bird was behind her, forgotten. On another afternoon, Rue sat at the edge of the pool and reached for something in the water, a reed stem or a shape in the mud, or nothing at all, just the water itself. Kanga's weight shifted on the rise, a small movement, a degree of tightening that had no name and made no sound. Rue's hand paused. His fingers curled back toward his palm. He sat up and did not reach again. After a moment, he picked up a pebble from the dry mud beside him and turned it in his hands. Kanga did not know she had moved. Rue did not know he had stopped. The afternoon continued, and between the rise and the water's edge, a small animal turned dry pebbles in his hands instead of touching the water, and neither of them could have said why. The pebble pile grew. Each day Rue added to it, stones collected from the mud at the pool's edge, from the dry ground beside his stone, from the bank where the earth had cracked in the heat. He did not collect them from the water. The water was there, and his hand was there, and the water was not where his hand went. The pile sat beside his stone, the pebbles different sizes, different colors, arranged in no order, all of them dry. Tuesday. Kanga walked to Owl's tree in the late morning, and Rue walked beside her because Tuesdays were for visiting Owl. Owl was at his window. The tea was set out, 2 cups with Rue's placed at the lower table, and a small pot of honey and biscuits, served with the quiet ceremony of someone who believes that civilization begins with biscuits.
Rue, I understand you have been spending time at the pool. The pool, if I am not mistaken, is the body of water that formed this spring when the stream's vernal overflow exceeded the absorptive capacity of the floodplain.
It has beetles,
Said Rue.
Indeed,
Said Owl.
beetles are, as a taxonomic order, remarkably—
water beetles.
Said Rue.
They walk on the water. How do they do that?
Owl explained. The explanation involved surface tension and hydrophobic CT, and Owl was thorough and largely correct. Rue listened briefly, completely, with a question already forming.
Can they walk on any water? Or just pool water?
An excellent question,
said Owl. And then, in the pause where the old owl would have filled the silence,
I don't know. I have not observed them on the stream.
I'll check,
said Roo. Kanga sat by the window. She held her tea and she listened to Roo and Owl, her eyes moving between Roo and the window. Through the window the canopy was thick and green, and a bird moved through the branches, small, brown, quick, gone. And Kanga's eyes followed it and lost it, and returned to Roo. The walk home was quiet. Roo walked ahead and Kanga walked behind, and the evening was coming on slowly, the light going amber and long through the trees. Roo talked as they walked. He talked about the bubbles, the reed stem, the way the water had a skin that things could walk on, strong enough to hold a beetle but not a pebble, because he had tried.
The beetles must be very light,
said Roo.
or very clever, or both.
Probably both,
said Kanga.
I'm going to watch them more tomorrow. Do beetles sleep? On the water? Where do they go?
I don't know,
said Kanga. Her hands were at her sides. They had been at her sides all afternoon, open, loose, holding nothing. She had not noticed this until now. They walked home. The light went. The path carried them. Behind them, in the scrub beside the pool where the hawthorn grew close and the mud was dark, the bird that Kanga had watched for 5 seconds and then forgotten was singing. It sang the way wrens sing, rapidly, densely, the song larger than the body it came from, carrying across the still water and the warm mud and the empty rise where 2 shallow depressions marked the grass, and the song did not follow them home, and they did not hear it. The next day at the pool, Roo at his stone, the water dark and still, the beetles crossing the surface near the far bank, the pebble pile at his side, dry stones on dry ground. Roo leaned forward. Something had caught his attention at the margin, a shape in the plants where the stems went into the water, or a movement, or nothing, just the dark gap where the vegetation met the pool. His body angled toward it, his weight shifting past the stone, and his hand reached toward the water. He glanced back. Over his shoulder, at Kanga, a look so brief it was barely a movement, the quick check of a body that has learned, below the level of knowing, where the edge of something is. Then he turned to the pool again. He did not reach into the water. He picked up a dry pebble from the mud beside his stone and turned it in his hands. The afternoon was warm. The beetles crossed the water. Kanga stood on the rise, and the sun was on her shoulders, and the day went on. The house was quiet. Roo was asleep, and Kanga was listening. Roo had gone to bed at the usual time, the day's heat still in his skin, the pool still in his eyes, his body heavy with the good tiredness of a young animal who has spent a long afternoon doing nothing with his whole self. Kanga sat on the edge of his bed while he told her about the pool. The same pool, the details different each time, because a day at a pool is not the same day twice, and nothing, in Roo's account, was always full of things.
The bubble today came from a different place,
He said.
not where the bubbles usually come from. This one was near the stone. My stone. And it was bigger. And when it popped, it smelled like mud. Not bad mud, just mud.
mud.
Said Kanga.
And the beetles were doing a different thing. They were all in one corner, near where the grass goes in, like a meeting. Do beetles have meetings?
I don't think so.
Said Kanga.
Maybe not a meeting.
Said Roo.
Maybe they just wanted to be near each other. Sometimes you want to be near things.
His eyes were closing. The sentences were getting shorter, the spaces between them longer.
Mama,
Yes?
the water is warmer now than before. I can feel it when I put my hand in.
The sun warms it.
said Kanga.
I know,
Said Roo.
but it's nice, feeling it get warmer. Like the water is doing something.
He was asleep. The sentence trailed into the breathing, the words dissolving into the rhythm of the chest, and Kanga sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the breathing settle and deepen and become the sound she knew better than any other sound, the specific pitch and pace and depth of this particular breath in this particular body. She rose. She drew the blanket straight, smoothing the fold at his shoulder, and her hand brushed his arm, and the arm was warm, and the skin was the temperature it should be. She knew this without thinking, as she knew the slightly cooler hands, the warmer feet, the heat that gathered at the back of his neck when he had been in the sun. The blanket was straight. She stepped back. She did not leave the room. There was a chair by the window, a chair she had placed there when Roo was an infant in the first weeks, when the distance between his bed and the next room had felt like a distance she could not afford, and the chair had stayed because chairs stay, because furniture outlasts the reason for its placement and becomes part of the room's fact rather than part of its argument. She sat in the chair. The window was open. The night air came through, warm, carrying the sound of the wood at night, the owls, the small rustles in the undergrowth, the stream's diminished murmur. The curtain moved in the air, a slow billowing that caught the faint light from outside and released it. She sat in the chair and she watched Roo sleep. His breathing was even, deep, slow, the rhythm that meant he was fully under. His position had settled, on his side, knees drawn up, one arm tucked beneath the pillow. He would shift in an hour, from his side to his back, the arms going wide, the legs straightening. She knew the schedule of his sleeping from 1,000 nights in this chair, or in the next room listening through the wall. He would not wake. She did not need to be here. She knew this completely, and she was here. She was monitoring. The temperature of the air through the window, and the depth of Roo's breathing, and the position of his body, and the quality of the darkness. And the monitoring was so old and so total that she had never separated it from herself, the way you do not separate your skeleton from your walking. The skeleton is not a thing you carry. The skeleton is how you stand. She had built this house, or she had arranged it, the furniture, the windows, the placement of every object in every room to serve the single purpose that every room served, which was the safe passage of a small body through the space. Roo's cup on the low shelf where his arm could reach it, the table's corner padded in the first year, the padding removed in the second when his height cleared it. The hook for his coat at his height, not hers. Every surface, every height, every edge, calibrated. She sat in the chair that she had placed by the window when he was an infant, and the chair held her as it always had, and the room was the room she had made, every piece of it oriented toward the bed where Roo slept. She faced one direction. She had always faced one direction. The direction was forward, toward the next moment of his life, and she had never. She stopped. Not stopped thinking, not stopped watching. Stopped the way an animal stops when it hears something. A full-body alertness, the attention swinging from its object to its own interior. She had never what? The sentence was there, unfinished, in the dark of the room where her son was sleeping, and the air was warm, and the curtain moved, and everything was safe. She had never what? The sentence wanted to complete itself. She could feel the completion waiting, the shape of it known before the sound arrives. She looked at her hands. They were in her lap, folded, as they had been folded every night in this chair for years. They were not holding anything. They had not been holding anything at the pool either. She remembered this, the noticing, the hands at her sides, open, without purpose. Her hands were the hands of someone who was ready to catch, to steady, to reach. They were hands shaped by the readiness. The readiness had shaped them the way water shapes stone, slowly, totally, until the stone does not remember the shape it had before the water came. She looked at Roo. He was growing. The longer legs, the stride finding its own rhythm, and the growing was carrying him in a direction she could not follow, because the direction was away, and away was where children go, and the going was correct, and she had built the path for the going. She had cleared every root and every stone and every branch, and the clearing was so complete that he walked it without looking down and without looking back, and the not looking back was what she had made. Roo breathed. His chest rose and fell. The blanket moved with the breathing. She tracked the motion, reading it for information, and the information was fine. He was fine. He was deeply, completely, safely asleep, in a room she had built around him. And she was sitting in a chair, watching him breathe, and the watching was doing nothing. And she had always been doing nothing, and the nothing was what her life was made of. The nothing of a danger that never arrived, because she had spent every moment standing between it and him, and the standing had been necessary when he was small enough to need it, and the standing had continued after the needing stopped, because the standing did not know how to stop. And she could see this now, in the dark, in the quiet. Her hands were in her lap. She opened them, she closed them, she opened them again and left them open, palms up, empty in the dark. Hands in a lap, palms up, open. Roo shifted. Earlier than the hour, 40 minutes maybe. He turned from his side to his back, the arms going wide, the legs straightening. The shift was smooth, the shift was ordinary. The shift was the shift she had predicted, and the prediction had been correct. She sat in the chair. The room was dark. The curtain moved. The house held the quiet of a house where everyone is sleeping and one person is awake, and the wakefulness had no purpose, and the purposelessness was new, was sharp, was the first clear thing she had seen in a very long time that she did not see coming. Outside, the wood settled and cooled. An owl called from the high oaks. The stream ran its diminished summer sound, the water over stones in the dark. She stood up. She sat down. She stood up again and went to the window and looked out at the night, the garden, the dark shapes of the rosemary and the fence and the path, and she was reading the garden for what might happen in it. The garden was dark and still, and nothing was going to happen in it, and she was reading it anyway, in the house she had built for a boy who was sleeping and did not need her to watch him sleep. She went back to the chair. Kanga did not sleep. She sat in the chair and listened to the breathing and felt the watching fill the room, and she sat with it for a long time, until the window showed the first grey change that meant the morning was coming, and she was already reading it. She went back to the pool. The morning was the same morning, the kettle, the flame, the cup with the chip, the cup without. Roo ate his breakfast and talked about the pool and slid from his chair and moved toward the door, and Kanga followed, and the path was the same path, and the hawthorn branch was above them, and Kanga could hear the machinery now. She heard it in her feet. They were reading the path, root, stone, slope, the soft section near the stream, and the predictions were arriving before the ground did, and the arriving before was the sound, the hum, the thing she had not heard until the night in the chair and could not stop hearing now. Roo ducked under the hawthorn branch. He cleared it by more than an inch now. The growing was accelerating in the summer heat, the legs lengthening, the torso stretching, and Kanga registered the new clearance and filed it, and caught herself filing it, and the catching was like catching your own hand reaching for something before you've decided to reach. The pool was there. Roo went to his stone. Kanga went to the rise. She stood in the depressions. The scanning fired. Bank, depth, scrub, Roo. And the sweep took less than a second, and the second contained the full assessment. Safe. The sun was warm on her shoulders, and she knew the sun was warm because the warmth was information, and the information consumed the warmth before the warmth could be warmth. An hour passed, maybe longer. Roo sat at the edge and watched the water, and held a reed stem and let it go, and watched a beetle cross the surface, and did not look up and did not look back. Kanga stood on the rise and watched him be inside the morning. On another morning, 2 days later, or 3, Roo sat at the pool. The pool had changed again. The water level had dropped another fraction, the ring of exposed mud widening, the plants at the margin drawing closer to the diminishing centre. Roo watched a dragonfly hold position above the water. The dragonfly watched the water. Kanga watched Roo. She was on the rise. Her feet were in the depressions. She had stopped trying to stop the watching. The trying was itself a form of the watching, a loop that tightened instead of releasing. She stood on the rise with her hands at her sides. Roo reached into the water. The machinery fired. The lean, the angle, the arm extended. The prediction assembled itself. He is picking something up. Picking up leads to examining. Examining leads to keeping or discarding. The arc of intention runs from reach to grasp, to assess, to decide, and the deciding will produce a movement, and the assessment. He picked up a stone, small, dark, wet. He held it in his paw. He did not examine it. He held it in his open paw, the way you hold something you have not decided to hold, your hand closing around a thing when the thing is there and the hand is there, and the closing is what hands do. The stone sat in his paw. The water ran off it in thin lines that found the creases of his palm. He sat on his stone and held the wet stone and looked at the pool. The prediction reached forward, and the next beat was not there. He was not examining. He was not keeping. He was not discarding. He was holding, just holding. And the holding was the thing. The prediction hung in the air. She was at the pool. Not watching the pool, at it. The surface of the water was dark and still, and the dark was not information, it was colour. The hawthorn branches above were green, simply, actually green. The mud at the edge was warm, the feeling of warm mud existing in the sun on a morning in July. A beetle was crossing the surface near the far bank, its legs making the faintest indentations in the water's skin, and the indentations were a thing she could see, here, now, the frail dimples where a small body pressed against the boundary between water and air, and the boundary held. Roo held the stone. She could see his hand, the paw, the fingers loosely curled, the stone dark and wet in the palm. She was not reading the hand, she was seeing the hand, her son's hand, holding a wet stone by a pool on a morning. The hand of a boy who was here and was not going anywhere, and did not need her to know what the stone was for, because the stone was not for anything. The stone was in his hand was in the morning was here. The gap was perhaps 5 seconds, perhaps less. A bird was singing in the scrub, had been singing, she realized, for some time, a rapid, dense sound from the low branches at the pool's far edge, the sound arriving in her attention like a clock's ticking that someone points out, not beginning but continuing. The wren, the small brown bird from the scrub. It was on a low branch at the water's edge, singing with its full throat, the song complicated and larger than the body smaller than she had realized, barely the size of Roo's fist. Roo put the stone back. He placed it gently in the water, and the water received it and closed over it, and the surface was still. The forward lean returned, the scanning resumed, and she was back. But the 5 seconds were behind her now. They sat in her like a stone in a palm, small, wet, without purpose, present. The afternoon was late when they walked home. The light came through the trees at the angle that meant the day was tilting toward evening. Roo walked ahead. He talked about the dragonfly and the beetle. He did not mention the stone he had held or the water on his palm. Kanga walked behind. The distance was the distance, but inside the watching there was a small gap now, a fraction of a second where the pausing let the ground in, the actual warmth of the path beneath her feet. The gap closed each time, but it was there. They came home. The house was there, the door, the step, the garden, the rosemary bush in the last of the light. From inside the house, Kanga could hear the sound of movement, the particular sound of a large body moving through a space with unusual care, the footfalls measured, the weight placed deliberately, the rhythm of someone who has learned to check the air around him before he fills it. Tigger was in the kitchen. He was making tea. Tea required patience, and patience required stillness, and stillness required the suppression of the bounce that lived in every joint and every stripe. But Tigger made tea now. He had been making tea since the spring, since the thing that had happened with the lower path and the wrens and the ground he had loved so much he had broken it. Each step attended to separately, the kettle, the cups, the waiting, the pouring. He had set out 3 cups, his, Kanga's, Rue's. The kettle was on. He was waiting for it, and the waiting was visible. The way his weight shifted from foot to foot, the small bouncing motion in his knees that he permitted himself because absolute stillness was not possible and should not be. The energy contained but not killed, redirected but not extinguished. Before he poured, he paused. He looked at the counter, at the cups, the kettle, the small arrangement of the tea things, and the looking was the thing he did now, the look around, the pause where he checked the space for what his bounce might disturb. The pause lasted a second, maybe less. Then he poured.
"Made tea,"
said Tigger.
Thank you.
Said Kanga. She stood in the doorway. Tigger was at the counter with a cup in each hand, and his face had the expression of a Tigger who has not yet decided whether the carefully is a loss or a gain, and the not deciding was there in the set of his mouth and the angle of his ears and the way his tail, which wanted to swing, held itself in a low, measured curve. She took the cup. He had made it correctly, the temperature right, the colour right. Rue came in.
Tigger, is that tea? Can I have mine?
"Already out for you, little buddy,"
said Tigger, and handed Rue his cup. The small one, the one with the chip. And the handing was careful, and the care was visible, and Rue took it without noticing the care, and the not noticing was its own kind of proof. Kanga sat at the table. Tigger sat across from her. Rue sat between them, drinking his tea, talking about the pool. Tigger's pause before pouring. Kanga's hands around the cup. 2 animals who had recently learned to hear the sound of what they had always been doing, and the hearing had cost them something they were still learning to name. Neither of them looked at the other's stillness, but the stillnesses were in the same room, and the room held them both, and the evening went on. That night, Rue told Kanga about the beetles, which had been in the corner again. He told her about the dragonfly, which had stayed for a long time. He did not mention the stone. He did not mention the water on his hand. He did not mention the smell of the mud when the bubble broke. Though Kanga had watched the bubble break and watched him lean close to the surface where it had been. His eyes were closing.
Night, Mama,
said Rue.
Good night,
said Kanga. She sat on the edge of the bed. The sentences had been shorter than the night before, fewer details, fewer questions, the account arriving already edited, the editing invisible to both of them, except that Kanga, listening in the dark, could not have said what was missing. Only that the telling was smaller. Only that the day had been larger than the telling of it. The next morning at the pool, Rue at his stone, the water lower, the mud wider, the summer leaning past its centre. Kanga on the rise in her depressions. Rue watched the water. A bubble rose and broke. He leaned forward toward the edge, his body tipping past the stone, and stopped. He straightened. He looked at the water from the stone's distance. Then, without turning his head, without looking back, in a voice that was casual and uncurious.
Mama, is the water deep here?
No,
Said Kanga.
it's shallow.
I know.
Said Roo. And he did know. He had watched the pool every day for a month. He knew the depth as surely as he knew his stone. He knew it with his whole body. He had not needed to ask. He leaned forward again. He touched the water. His hand went in to the wrist and came out, and he looked at the wet, and the looking was his. Kanga stood on the rise. The mornings went on. The pool went on. The summer tilted past its centre and began the slow lean toward August, visible in the light and in the grass, which had gone from gold to pale, and in the pool, which had dropped another inch, the plants closing in, the water drawing into itself. Kanga walked the path. Roo walked ahead. The distance was the distance. The gap came when it came. Not always, not reliably, not on command. Something would shift and the watching would loosen, and the ground would come in for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, before the watching closed. She had stopped trying to make it wider. The not trying was not peace. It was something else, the body not yet knowing where to put its weight. The pool each morning, the rise each morning, Roo at his stone, the water dark, the mud marked with the record of the night's visitors. The scrub thick and green and full of the sounds of July, insects rustling, the occasional dense, rapid song of the bird in the hawthorn. On a morning in late July, the sky was thin and blue, and the air was already warm when they left the house. Roo walked the path with the loose-limbed ease of a body that has walked it so many times. The walking is no longer walking, but a kind of flowing. He was taller. He was taller than he had been at the start of the summer, and the tallness had changed his gait, longer steps, a different rhythm, the whole body finding its new proportions day by day in the continuous motion of a thing becoming its next version. Kanga walked behind. She watched him walk, and inside the watching, like a stone at the bottom of a stream, sat the knowledge of what the watching was and what it cost. She had not resolved it. The watching continued. The knowledge continued. They occupied the same body. The pool was smaller than it had been in June. The water had drawn inward, the margins widening, the plants at the edge now standing in damp earth rather than shallow water. The ring of dark mud had broadened into a flat, cracked apron around the remaining water. The pool was becoming a different thing, something in between, a body of water in the process of finding out how small it could be and still be itself. Roo went to his stone. His stone was further from the water now. The edge had retreated past it, leaving it on the dry apron, and Roo sat on it and looked at the water across 3 feet of mud that had been water when the summer started. He did not seem troubled by the retreat. The pool was the pool. Kanga went to the rise. She stood in her depressions. The scanning ran, and she heard it, and the hearing was familiar now, and the familiarity did not make it quieter. The morning settled. The sun found the pool, and the light lay on the dark water, and the water held the light the way water holds everything, loosely, without grasping, letting it move as the surface moved. Roo sat on his stone. A water beetle crossed the far side of the pool, and another followed, and the two of them moved in paths that nearly crossed and did not. And Roo watched them, with his chin on his knees, and his arms around his legs, and his whole body folded into the shape of watching. Roo reached into the water. Her attention fired, and this time she felt it fire, felt the ignition like a hiccup. He held a stone, small, dark, wet. He held it in his open paw, and the water ran off it, and he sat with it. The prediction found nothing to close on, and the gap opened, and the gap was there, and Kanga was in it. The pool, the water, the mud, the light on the surface, The beetle still moving, its legs making their faint marks on the skin of the water. The hawthorn branches above, the leaves moving in a breeze she could feel. She could feel the breeze, on her face, warm, carrying the smell of mud and water and the green vegetable smell of the plants at the margin. She could feel the sun on her arms. She could feel the ground. The ground, the dry grass. The earth beneath the grass, warm from the morning, packed firm from her standing, and the warmth was in her feet, and the ground was ground, and she was here. She sat down. Not a decision, a settling, like silt when the current stops. Her legs folded, and her weight shifted, and she sat on the grass beside the rise. Not on the rise, not on the elevation that gave her the sightline. She sat on the ground, and the ground received her the way the pool received the stone, without comment, without adjustment, closing around the new weight. She had not sat at the pool before. She had always stood. Sitting was... She did not know what sitting was. Sitting was what the ground was for, if you were the kind of animal who used the ground for sitting rather than for standing on. The grass was warm against her legs. The specific, physical, unrepeatable warmth of this grass, this ground, this morning. Her hands were at her sides. She moved one, her right hand, and placed it on the grass beside her, palm down, fingers spread, and the grass pressed up between her fingers, and the earth was warm beneath her palm. She could feel it. Not as data, not as temperature. She could feel the ground the way Roo felt the stone in his paw. The weight, the texture, the warmth, the there-ness of a thing that is here because here is where it is. Her hand on the ground under her hand. The machinery was still running. She could hear it, further away now, as though the gap had pushed it to a distance, the hum still there but not filling every space, making room. But her hand was on the grass, and the grass was warm, and the warmth was here. Roo put the stone back. He placed it in the water, and watched the water close, and sat on his stone, and was still. He looked back. Over his shoulder at Kanga, a quick look, the look of a body that has learned to check. The glance so brief and so practiced it was almost not a look at all. Then he turned to the pool again. Kanga's hand was on the grass. In the hawthorn scrub on the far side of the pool, the wren was singing. It had been singing, she could hear that now, the song that was already happening when the watching quieted enough to let it in. The song was rapid and dense and complicated, and it came from a body she could see now on a low branch, the small brown bird, the round body, the tail held upright, the throat working. The wren sang the way wrens sing, because the scrub was warm and the pool was there, and the morning was the morning, and the singing asks nothing of the listener and offers nothing to the listener except the singing itself, which was small and which carried. The pool was still. The water held the light. The mud at the edges was warm and marked with the prints of things that had come and gone. Roo sat on his stone. The beetle crossed the water. The wren sang. Kanga sat on the grass with her hand on the ground, and the ground was warm, and she could feel it.